Good day to you all, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Barry Tooker, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. The payments industry is going through a profound transformation. Financial institutions are under pressure to connect and initiate transactions with greater speed, data transparency, and interoperability, all against the backdrop of a modernization to payments infrastructure at a global, regional, and domestic level. Transformation in the 2020s will revolve around instant payments, open banking, and ISO 20022 migration, reflecting the regulatory and technological changes from the previous decade. While these trends are occurring on a global level, there is a notable discrepancy amongst geographies in both direction and timing. Financial institutions of all sizes need to ensure that they navigate these conditions by implementing strategic thinking and the right technology choices. Today, our panel will explore these industry initiatives, delve into the opportunities and challenges they present, and provide their insights to help you manage the impacts and implications that will affect your business. During today's session, you can ask questions of the panelists by typing your questions into the window on your control panel, and we will be leaving time near the end of our time today to answer those questions. I will now ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves. I'm going to turn to Saran. Saran, can you get us started here by giving us kind of an overview of open banking and some things that people should be considering as they look to address this? You're muted.
Thank you, Barry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Saran Bomakanti. I'm based in Poughkeepsie, New York. I worked for IBM for many, many years. In the past 13 years, I've been involved with software vendors and in the financial industry, and as well as working with the banks around the world, helping them with modernization and digital transformation. So regarding open banking, very good question, Barry. Let me just give a couple of minutes overview on it. Open banking is a practice of sharing financial information, and this is done, electronically and securely. And the most important thing is it has to be approved by account holder. Okay, you might have heard it as open banking in some geos. It's also called PSD or PSD2. PSD stands for Payment Services Directive. It's a regulation. Initially, this all started out of UK. A lot of the large banks were required to conform to this regulation, then spread across other geos. It's in many banks have or adapting or have adapted open banking in Asia and Latin America and so on. In U.S., this is not a mandated via regulation or government drive, but it's more it's industry driven. That's the difference. It has very timelines to it, and it's done in multiple phases. But going back to, in a nutshell, what open banking is, first of all, it has and will continue to transform the banking landscape, quite extensively, as it is all about data sharing. Prior to this initiative or regulation, the bank that you bank with as a customer, they hold your information. And as part of this open banking regulation, they're required to provide, share your account information to third-party providers. Of course, they have to be approved. And this could be fintech companies, this could be other banks, but nevertheless, that information has got to be shared with these third-party providers. And what sort of information we're talking about? This is your account balances, your payment transactions, your loans, and so on. So what we hear from talking to some of the customers and banks, both seeing benefit, is from a customer point of view, what we're hearing is that certainly open banking, by having more competition, more innovation, it's at the end of the day, it's better for the clients, right? They get better offers, more targeted offers, better rates, and so on. So and more people are wanting your business. So it's certainly that's really good. Certainly there are concerns, where's my information going to end up? Who, what country? So there, GDPR will certainly help mitigate that, but certainly security is a concern that needs to be addressed, and banks are certainly addressing that. From an IT perspective, it's all about, APIs. APIs are the heart of the open banking. This is how the banks and third-party vendors communicate the digital channels. So these obviously have to be done highly securely. So I know Biju, you got more information about open banking. I'm going to pass this on to you.
Biju,
No,
over to
thank
you.
you so much, Sarah. So I guess good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, as the case may be. My name is Biju. I head banking as a vertical for Fiorano. I'm based in London, and really excited to be joining everyone today, including Barry, Sarah, and Stephen. Primarily, I think from my standpoint, I'd like to cover two broad areas. One is the fact that Fiorano works with banks globally. So whether it's open banking related change or change as a result of ISO 20022, we've been working in both these spaces for a while now. And there's a fair amount of learning that we had over the last few years that has got back into the product. So I'd like to throw a bit of light on the things we're seeing in UK, Europe, and globally from an ISO and open banking standpoint. And the other part is really talk about this collaboration we have going with IBM, which we're super excited about, because it really brings together the best of Fiorano software with IBM underlying infrastructure to deliver accelerated compliance around open banking and transformation around areas such as ISO 20022. So coming to open banking itself, like I said, I'm based in London. I think I'm very fortunate to be able to have witnessed open banking as we went through very, very early stages, starting back in 2016. In UK, we very recently crossed 2 million active users. So that number is actually from Open Banking UK OBIE, which is the official implementation entity for open banking in the UK, which is supported by the CMA. But it's growing very, very well. Open banking is a success. Like I said, we just crossed 2 million active users of open banking powered products and services in the UK. Right? And if you look at the chart at the bottom, right? So we've shown you numbers from July 2018 through to July 2020. Right? So we've got a quarter by quarter growth. But that chart shows you API calls every month from the top 9 banks in the United Kingdom. So as you can see, what was initially 3 million calls a month just recently crossed 475 million calls. So open banking, there's no question about it. It is a success. And it's not just UK. So the chart on the right shows EU-wide numbers. Again, UK is leading with 583 million active calls. That's as of September. But most of Europe is not far behind. So the fact is, whether it is because of regulation or because of or market competition, open banking is here to stay globally. And it's not just a EU and UK wide thing, right? Australia has CDR, and we had the first recipient of CDR data. I think it was Regional Australian Bank in July. Latin America, we're seeing open banking sandboxes go live in Venezuela, in Colombia, Brazil, Mexico. Israel has adopted open banking. Canada has got CDF. We're seeing open banking in many cases extend to broader open finance, to other verticals. But I think the bottom line is regulation or not, open banking is here to stay. What that means is, from a bank standpoint, there's a lot of technology change you need to think about. And people like Fiorano, we have the benefit of working across geographies, right? Bringing a lot of those accelerators to the table. And to a large extent, that's what our entire collaboration with IBM, and we've worked very closely with Sarah's team over the last 6 months or so, brings to the table. Right? So Fiorano sitting on top of IBM helps banks accelerate multiple journeys. So on the one hand, there's open banking, compliance and compete. The second is ISO 20022, and there's a massive payments-led change that's happening all over the world as a result of SWIFT dictated ISO 20022 changes or broader MIs, market initiatives themselves. And the third one is composability itself, so helping banks change fundamental banking infrastructure to cope with this change. But anyhow, that was a quick introduction, but very, very excited to be here.
And Steve, thank you both, Sarah and Bijou. Steve, over to you from a banking perspective. You know, where do you see things going, and you know, just what's going on the banking side?
So Barry, and I can put it from two angles. I think one is as the service provider. So we are a financial institution at BNY Mellon, and I can think back to when I started early in my career. To me, open banking was being able to provide a corporate client or a financial institution client the information reporting about an account from another bank. And this was innovative in the in the 90s or late 80s when we said, hey, we're going to go to another bank, have them send us a statement in some kind of format. We'll take it into our system, make it look like ours, and then we're going to send it back to the corporate client. That way the corporate client or the financial institution only has to connect to one bank to at least get their information reporting. And man, that was innovative. We thought that was great. But the open banking concept, and Saren referenced this, Bijou talked about it, it's more than just information reporting. It's being able to access your account, not just for information, but be able to move your money. And that's the real trick. And I think that's the next step, at least from a US perspective, where we have to think about how we're going to be able to deliver that, how we're going to be able to implement it. And from the service provider perspective, it's exactly as Bijou and Saren are saying. We've got pressure from our clients. They're saying, hey, this is what we want. BNY Mellon, how are you going to deliver it? And that's where we're headed. We know that we can provide an additional value add to our clients to offer something like this, and it presents itself as a competitive advantage. We can provide this to our clients, this open banking, and deliver more services, and as Saren pointed out, get more information about our clients. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect, Barry, that I just want to touch on briefly is as a consumer. So, you know, I'm here in the United States, and I actually have the benefit, or maybe disadvantage, well, maybe I'm going to look at it as a benefit, of working at a number of different financial institutions. I started as a teller many years ago. My bank got bought by another bank, and then I moved to a different bank. And so I've worked for a lot of different banks. And one trick that you'll find if you work in the banking industry is if you work for a bank, they make you open an account at that bank so that they can pay you. And that's where your money goes. So I have all these legacy employee accounts with Wachovia, or now Wells Fargo. I have one with HSBC. I've got accounts all over the place. And what's the challenge for me? Well, the challenge is knowing where all my money is. You know, how do I do it? So I got an app, put it on my phone. It was great, except some banks won't deliver the information to the app. I don't know. Just a quick little side story. The other day, I got a call from Capital One. I shouldn't name banks, but I'm going to name it. So I have an account at Capital One, and my wife had talked me into opening the account many years ago because they had this great interest rate. This is back when ING owned them. It was ING Orange before it was Capital One. So I had the account in there, and I completely forgot about it. You know, I thought I didn't have any money in there. Well, Capital One calls and they say, hey, you know, you got an account. You don't have one account, you have two accounts with us, and you know they've been out there for a long time. And I thought to myself, oh well, there can't be much money in them. And the guy said, you know, what do you want us to do with the money? And I said, well, what is it, $5? You know, $10? I can't even be earning interest anymore. No, it was in the thousands of dollars. I don't even know how I got that money in there. But if I had the capability to put that into one app and get it from a central place, wouldn't that be great? To me, as a consumer, that's what open banking is.
There you go. You know, it is the beginning of a journey. So what I'd like to do is start the next portion of the webinar by asking you our audience out there two questions. And the first question, and I'm sure you've gotten this from many and very different places, but it'll give us an idea. is what is the status of your ISO 20022 migration project? And as you can see here, you have multiple choices. It's not yet started, delayed due to the current COVID-19 pandemic. It's a work in process, solution identified or shortlisted, or you have a proof of concept or an evaluation in progress. So I'd ask you all to take a minute or to take the next couple of seconds just to give us an idea of what's going on out there, and we'll be able to tailor the presentation and as we go forward. Interesting. Not yet started. And then kind of, so, breaking it up, I'm glad to see a lot of you weren't affected by the pandemic, thank goodness. It certainly had an effect on all of our businesses and all of our personal lives. I'm glad to see the work in progress and even happier to see the solutions identified, shortlisted, or POC. I would just tell you that if you haven't started yet, you're behind the curve. This is clearly something that you have to take very, very seriously. You have to work with all of your internal and external stakeholders, all of your internal and external application providers. This is a big deal. The other thing is to know that this is not an IT project. This is an operational reality project. It is going to change the way that data moves. If you take a look at what's going on here in the United States with the Fed and what the clearinghouse is doing, certainly what SWIFT is doing. And if you haven't started yet, my words of advice are please, please get started. Put your team together, understand your stakeholders, and get them involved in the process. Bijou, Steve, Saren, anything to add to that?
I mean, maybe I can start, right? So I think 38% not yet starting is slightly concerning. I guess to a certain extent, what may be happening is that, and something we're seeing consistently in different countries, is because of different sets of communication from specific market infrastructure announcements or from SWIFT themselves. I think we've seen a number of banks almost think that everything's pushed out and the SWIFT deadline is only now 2022, so there's a lot of time to do things. I think that's a bit of a false sense of security because, like Barry was saying, the impact of ISO, and just going back by our own experience, when we started doing ISO work about 18 months ago in the East, the impact is pretty widespread within a bank. There are multiple touch points. As a bank, you have to learn a new data language itself. So even for those banks who are doing like-for-like translations initially, there is still a fairly large amount of work. So 30% not starting is slightly concerning. Like Barry said, I suggest you start quickly. There is no time to relax on this.
Yep.
Steve, Saren, anything?
No, I agree. This is Saran. I agree with Bijou that it is something, certainly they got to look into it. Remember, in order to stay ahead of competition, you got to reinvent. And view this as an opportunity. How do I stay ahead of my competition and really provide better services and jump into this before my competition does to improve my customer satisfaction and so on.
And Barry, I would just add here that I think there's a number of factors here. There's a mix of participants that I think are on our audience list today. And as I think Bijou pointed out, as you might have mentioned also, in different jurisdictions, this is less of an imminent change than it is in some other ones. And depending upon your footprint of the services that you offer or the services that you're receiving from a financial institution, this could be less urgent or more urgent. And the other thing I'd mention is that I had worked at SWIFT for a number of years, and I can recall in 2006 when SWIFT came up with the standard. And if you think back, 2006 that was a lot of years ago now. That was already 14 years ago. At the time, we said 2010. that's when we were going to go for ISO. So there may be some element of, yeah, I bet it's coming, but I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. Which leads us kind of directly or indirectly to our second question. And along the same lines, what is the status of open banking at your institution? And you have the same numbers, same kinds of answers rather, trying to understand what open banking is, putting the team together, building a business case. It's a work in progress, solutions identified, shortlisted, and or POC and evaluation in progress. So again, I'd ask if you take a second or two and provide some feedback, that'll certainly help us. Well, gentlemen, it looks like we have our work cut out for us, trying to understand open banking. Hopefully, by the time that we're done here, you'll have a better idea of what open banking is, and also helping you understand the impacts and implications, and really help you to get ready. The other thing is, happy to see that with the work in progress and certainly the evaluations and POCs. Again, this is going to be a financial institution-wide undertaking, so that you're going to have to get all of your stakeholders involved. I'll just go quickly around the team here. Bijou, anything to add on that?
Barry, these are very interesting numbers, right? And we totally understand the large numbers.
Yep.
We're trying to understand it because it is complex initially. If you're a traditional bank, if you're used to fiercely protecting customer data for the last 60 years, this is a big change. I mean, I've been in meetings in London where I've had the head of compliance, bang her hands on a table and say, we will not do open banking. But it's a regulation, they had to do it, right? But we understand that it could be a fairly painful thing and slightly complicated. I think the one thing, if you're in America or North, South, Canada, that you can benefit is a lot of the learnings we have from UK and Europe, right? So we've gone through very difficult and painful periods of actually trying to figure this out and deciphering SCA and how it needs to work, and looking at how EIDAS certificates and trusts works across the ecosystem. But we've been doing this for a good 3 years now in UK and Europe. So the entire standards for open banking and the trust ecosystem, custom consent models, security, all that is very, very mature. So at least the one good thing in your favor is the fact that from an America standpoint, whether that's Latin America or North or even Canada, right, a lot of this is almost quite templatized now. So to a large extent, it's going to be much easier than what we've had to figure out through trial and error in UK and Europe. Back to you, Barry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. What I'd like to do is to get into some questions now for our panel. Gentlemen, ISO 20022 and open banking seems to be disconnected topics. What is the rationale behind combining them in today's webinar, and is there a relationship? Bijou?
Thanks, Barry. I think that's a really relevant question. So on the face of it, they may appear to be quite disconnected areas. And conventionally, we know in banking, banks have looked at clearing, payments, and settlement, core banking, quite separately. But that's changing, right? So like Saran initially mentioned, PSD2 is what triggered open banking across UK and Europe. PSD2 is actually the Payment Services Directive. So while on the face of it, we are dealing with SCA and multi-factor authentication and EIDAS and APIs, at the end of the day, from a customer standpoint, it's about control over your finances. It's about initiating payments. And that's where the really powerful use cases are emerging. So while these are conventionally have been managed separately, with all the change happening in the world of banking, you have to look at payments and core banking or banking functions almost holistically. So from an open banking standpoint, payments absolutely influence it. And even if you, for a moment, try to ignore the internal view, externally, there's a lot of consolidation happening, right? Payments are becoming almost invisible. We are all used to Uber today. Uber is an invisible payment. When do you pay your Uber driver, right? right? Finance is getting embedded into non-banking journeys so effortlessly. I mean, today you can on Google Maps find and pay for parking. I think Amazon recently announced a partnership with Exxon, where you can pay for your fuel just by speaking to Alexa, right? Amazon e-commerce store has had Klarna type of buy now, pay later checkout options for a while. E-wallets are becoming multifunctional. I mean, Apple Pay was on your phone earlier, but Apple now have their own card. I mean, 10 years ago, Apple was just a mobile phone, but Apple are in financial services. Amazon today offers short-term credit to SME businesses, right? But it's not just big tech, right? There is a fair amount of competition from smaller fintechs also. If you look at the recent announcement you had in the US with GECO is a 23-member startup in America that bought a 63-year-old bank in Minnesota. I mean, so the reality, and Saran outlined this earlier, so did Steve, is that competition is changing. Whether it's because of regulation or not, you as a bank need to be able to adapt and be able to compete. So it's not just about supporting external use cases as a bank and moving from batch payments to real-time payments. For you to survive and thrive and grow, you need to almost imbibe the real-time nature of instant payments and open banking and being customer first at the core. And from a technology standpoint, that's what IBM and Fiorano are doing now. I mean, the whole partnership is about that. But absolutely, I think there's a massive overlap between open banking and payments. To answer your question, Barry.
Steve, your thoughts on this?
Well, Bijou, I think, hit it on the head. There is an integral relationship between payments and open banking, and I kind of talked about it at the beginning, where my concept of open banking in the 90s was information reporting, and even there we had a challenge from a standards perspective. If we wanted a statement from, JP Morgan Chase, well, that's not the same statement that we're going to get from Citibank. That's not the same statement that we get from BNY Mellon. They're all various different types. Even if we use the SWIFT standard, each bank speaks differently. Now with the ISO standard, everybody's speaking the same, and it's got two separate benefits, I think. One is from a payment standpoint, then when a user from an open banking perspective needs to use an app to be able to make a payment, when that payment gets initiated, every bank speaks the same language. It's not going to be a new integration to some other bank to try and be able to create a payment. It's going to always be the same. It makes it much simpler from an implementation standpoint, much more efficient to make that payment. The second advantage, to me anyway, is this integration that I can then use in my back office. I've got ISO that I'm speaking, and it's got on the payment application, but I can take the information, the data elements that are in the payment engine, and then feed them into the information reporting tools, into the DDA platform, into my compliance engine, all speaking the same type of language, understanding what's out there. And to me, that's the other integral part. That's how these two things go together, I think, Barry.
Good, thank you. So moving on, how does the continued rollout of ISO 20022 based solutions help with the payments transformation, modernization, and open banking? Saran, over to you, please.
Yeah, sure, Barry. A lot of the points that Steve and Bijou brought up, totally agree, and that's really what's happening. Many banks that I interact with, my teams interact with, they're really taking a holistic approach when it comes to payments modernization, payments transformation. They're really looking at end-to-end payments value chain, right? Starting at the front end, where the users interact with, and the middle layer, and the back-end systems, and all the way to clearing and settlement gateways. So, the banks, what we are hearing is that they're using open banking as a way to really modernize their payment system, not just supporting the regulation, but really going beyond. How do I transition from the product-centric approach that was there for many, many years to more customer-centric, so that I can deliver more targeted products and improve the overall payments rails and so on. So that's and improve the security mechanism and the risk models and so on. And also they're looking at How do I enhance our ecosystem, the payments ecosystem, with all these new fintech companies? Whom should I partner with? So that's from the open banking. That's what we're saying. And with respect to ISO 20022, again, both Biju and Steve hit it. I mean, they're speaking the same language. Prior to that, they were all different. There were many fractions. What that caused is delay. It was error prone, but speaking the same language, same structure. The straight through processing, STP, has really improved and will continue to improve. And this helps in terms of supporting the regulation, but also overall in terms of the overall payment processing, agile environment, and so on. By the way, one other thing, Barry, I want to
Sure.
add is related to the second question that I asked. I'm not surprised that a lot of people are not aware of open banking or want to learn more about it. One thing that we do, and we have teams around the world, is we can do workshops, spend a day or couple of days to kind of really help them understand what open banking is. But really beyond us, we bring in the Fiorano team and the IBM team, sit together, and what does it mean your bank, because while you're doing this transformation, you cannot shut your bank. So what does it mean when I'm modernizing? What impact does it have on the technically? What impact would have on the business side? So both business and IT teams are in the same room working with us, and we'll guide you through that, and followed by POC as well. That you do that's something we could certainly do.
Biju, Steve, anything to add?
Absolutely. I think the only thing is it's about harmonization, right? And standardization. So ISO fosters external harmonization. Sorry, ISO brings external harmonization, and what it is forcing banks to do is to improve the standardization within the bank. And there are huge benefits out of that, right? So whether it's APIs or microservices or cloud, these are all things that we know are absolutely required. And quite often we see, banks are not always at the forefront to adopt all of these latest technologies, and they're not even latest anymore. But I think what ISO is doing is almost forcing banks to implement technology that can make them as relevant as the fintechs are now competing with, and in the process, really abstract away from those limitations of old legacy systems, right? So eventually, from our standpoint, we see ISO as a huge opportunity. The opportunity will come once there is standardization across the board. But that standardization, like Steve was mentioning, absolutely is going to help banks.
Steve, any additional comment there? Or?
No, I think these guys captured it, Barry.
Okay, good. Okay. So moving on then, how should a financial institution consider transforming and positioning their business models and operating strategies to account for these evolving payment initiatives? Steve, as the banker on the panel, how do you do all of this stuff?
That's two separate questions, I think, Barry. The doing and the direction are they got to go. They go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. But first we have to set the direction. And I think at least when you first walk into it, it sounds big and it sounds overwhelming. And you certainly scared the bejesus out of everybody with the whole ISO. You got to get moving right away thing. I think, and it's the right message, right? It's coming and it's a big project, and you got to look at it. But I think you got to take it in little pieces, and that's the way that we're looking at it here. We've got to figure out what's the best benefit. Where can we tackle this in a little piece, and then get to the big pieces. How can we then move the whole thing? So and there's a couple ways I think any institution could do it. We took a look at it from I think two different angles. One is the regulatory perspective. Where will these changes be required? Where are we going to have to offer something along these lines? And as Biju pointed out, as Saran pointed out, in Europe, we don't have a choice. These things are coming from an open banking perspective. It's not an option. we've got to deliver it. And that's where we started. We have to do the open banking there. The same with ISO. You already got to speak ISO when you're speaking in SEPA. You already got to speak ISO when you're talking in Switzerland, for example. So we had to put that in place. Then we take a look at where is it evolving next. We know Target 2 is going to be moving, so we've got a project around, all right, well, we got to implement ISO for Target 2. And as we develop that, we've got a core competency already. We've got people who know ISO because we had to do it already. We got people who understand open banking because we already had to start it. We keep that core center of expertise together. Now it's a new project. Maybe it's something that's different, right? Target 2 is not SEPA, that's for sure. But we can integrate that subject matter expertise in a project team to be able to move the ball forward as it relates to those types of topics. From a big picture perspective, we see how this is moving, and then we figure out how to deliver. All right, well, we know we got to do it for this. We've got another project, maybe to modernize some back office application. Well, how does that fit in? How is that going to match with this ISO system? And Saran had talked about this whole front to back. You got to look at it from the client perspective first. What's he talking about? How does this provide benefit to the client? And then take it and deliver it all the way through the back office. Well, the client wants this, so I know that the middleware has to be able to do this. And I know that the back office needs to do this. And from a compliance perspective, well, I've got to keep this in mind. All these things kind of fit together. And what starts out as a small thing and moves it at an enterprise level. Does that make sense? Was that a little too fluffy? It's okay, right?
Oh,
Okay.
I'll defer to the other gentlemen. Bijou, Saran, anything to add on that?
I think what Stephen said was perfect, and that's it's a really good internal view from a bank standpoint, right? I think as a vendor to banks, where I think I'd say is slightly different. I absolutely agree with Steve, but there's two sides to it. There's comply and compete. So complying is what do you do to kind of tick the boxes, and then how do you leverage, right? So the one thing I'd say is, and this is from what we've seen over the last few years, is don't spend too much money trying to comply, because compliance has been done, right? There's so many out-of-the-box, off-the-shelf products you can buy for ISO and open banking that tick a box fairly easily. Spend your time and money on thinking how to compete, because as a bank, the biggest change we're seeing, so there are two, I think, large, broad technology or broad challenges we're seeing. One is legacy technology and the limitations because of legacy, right? And that's something IBM and Fiorano can help with very easily. But the second one is culture. It's about mindset. It's about a traditional bank having to think like a startup. That's really challenging. And absolutely, what Stephen said is about focusing on what those benefits are absolutely key. But you got to think like a fintech. You got to think about APIs. You got to think about straight-through processing, like Simon mentioned. You got to think beyond cloud. I mean, now in today's world, everyone's got multi-cloud. So how are you going to get things to work between the IBM cloud and Azure, as an example? Think customer first. Think about volume spikes. So it's a great use case for Fiorano on IBM. We can leverage OpenShift for workloads to dynamically scale up and down as and when there's a spike in volume. Think about embedded finance. Think about invisible payments, because for sure your competitors are, right? So think on those lines. Create strong open banking foundations and infrastructure. Create a proper strategy. And like Saran was saying, the partnerships with fintechs are absolutely key, right? No one can do everything by themselves. So again, you need technology at the core to help you, connect to multiple fintechs and create those propositions very, very quickly. Don't get left behind.
Saran, anything to add or no?
No,
Good.
I think these two nailed it. I mean, yeah,
Good.
so
Good.
really
So
nice
Barry,
job.
let me just jump in on what Bijou had said there. So it's funny. Well, maybe it's not so funny, but Bijou is coming from a software firm, right? He's coming from a fintech, essentially. Saran, same thing. These are fintech companies, and the competition angle comes first. But coming from a bank perspective, we don't go in alphabetical order. We always think about compliance. That's the first thing is compliance. Competition, equally important, but it's always second.
I gotcha. So that kind of moves us on to the next question here is, what is the effect of ISO 20022 and open banking on the landscape of the financial data? Bijou.
Oh, so thanks, Barry. So the effect is pretty large. So like Steve and Saranor mentioned, right? ISO 20022 brings a new data language to the center of the bank, right? ISO is not new. So Steve mentioned, I think it said 2006, right? It's been around for a while, but it's only now that we're seeing, large scale mass adoption. But once adopted properly, you're going to have the benefit of contextual, rich payments data across the enterprise, and that's huge, right? From a end-to-end payments value chain standpoint, the benefits are huge. The use cases, I think we've seen the tip of the iceberg. There's some initial use cases we're seeing, and everyone talks about reconciliation, which is a great example, right? You can send an invoice along with a payment as part of an ISO message. What it allows a bank to do is to reconcile at the edge, right? From a cost standpoint, there's a lot of money a bank can save by completely almost changing or getting rid of functions that just do investigation right now, because it's just not possible without ISO. That's a very, very simple use case. Banks have been looking at forecasting. I mean, there's a white paper we released along with Accenture a few weeks ago, and there's some fantastic use cases in there about just using ISO data to forecast better and provide better lending to corporates. I mean, there's so many benefits. So it's not just about faster payments and instant payment and doing things faster. It's about value in the data. And if you look beyond the tech itself, right? Banking is becoming almost embedded into a lot of systems. So even for fintechs to create new propositions that are cognitive and use AI, again, all that can work if there's the right data. Without the right data, nothing's going to pan out properly. And ISO is the one platform, ISO 20022, that actually brings standardization across the world for banking. I think it's phenomenal.
Good. Which brings us to our next audience poll question, and that is, what are the top challenges what is the top challenges in the implementation of your ISO 20022 and open banking in your institutions? Ensuring proper security, ineffective data and information sharing, the need to integrate the newer technologies, or all of the above? Again, I guess I'm not surprised at all with all of the above. Each of these is a challenge in and of itself, and as we've just been speaking about here in some of the earlier questions and the responses that are coming back, the interesting one here is that no one thinks that the ineffective data and information sharing is a challenge. I find that interesting. But certainly ensuring proper security, as we've just talked about, Steve talked about compliance, and the integration of the newer technologies, and then obviously all of the above. Gentlemen, any quick comments on this?
So Barry, this is Steve. I would just say I also find the ineffective data and information sharing very interesting. As coming at it from a provider perspective, to me, that might be one of the biggest challenges. But for both of these two initiatives, the ISO 20022 and open banking, if I look at ISO 20022, the granularity of the information that's included on a payment message is not something that's easy to provide today, at least from my perspective. The information that you need to include, for example, like a country in the country spot, or a state or a province in the state of the province spot, that's not something that my static data today can easily produce. I don't have a core application that understands ISO already and has already broken out these individual data elements. So ineffective data for me is a big hurdle, I think. The other thing I mentioned, the open banking, the information sharing, and to me, that concept goes two ways. The first way is when I talked about way back in the 80s when we did this, information sharing, when we did information reporting from other banks, and that's one aspect to it. But that's giving somebody information that maybe they already had, but it's not moving anything. And when we talk about information sharing to move money, well, what needs to be shared? The credentials of the authorized person who needs to move that money needs to be shared. And to me, that's a bit of a hurdle, right? Now I'm giving away the farm. I've got somebody who's got access to be able to move that information. And I, as a bank, my whole purpose in life is trust. I'm the fiduciary. I keep track of that. I know where that information is, and I keep it safe. Being forced or being open to sharing that information with another third party causes me a little bit of angst. You know, how do I make sure that I keep that safe? But I know Bijou and Saren have perfect answers for that.
Well, one thing I want to say is Steve, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, yes, you got cyber threats, but you have, you know, these threats coming not only externally, but also internally. So the banks got to monitor that, both internal and external threat. Matter of fact, about 20-25% of threats are coming within the bank. So there's number of areas that they've got to focus. You know, at the end of the day, it's data sharing. You're sharing crown jewels of a bank, you know, customers' financial information. So looking at the existing capabilities, how do I enhance these? Starting with the fraud detection, starting with the KYC, you know, more stringent AML process and all of those things. I think that those are the areas, you know, got to be looked into and enhanced to where it need to be.
Bijou, anything to add, or?
No, I think Steve and Saran covered it really well. I'm slightly surprised that everybody is with 0% on data information sharing. But I don't think I have anything to add.
Okay, so moving right along then, what are some of the IT challenges financial institutions need to overcome when implementing an open banking and ISO 20022 solution? Bijou, I'll come right back to you.
Thanks, Barry. So I guess from an ISO standpoint, the number one challenge is going to be learning a new language. ISO 20022, like Steve outlined, is a very detailed language, and most likely most of a bank's current systems are not ready to speak that language at all. So there's the need to understand the language itself, and whether you as a bank have the option to work with a slightly 1 or 2 year like-for-like period before you go to full-fledged migration, or if you're going to do something like T2S as an example, which is, you know, big bang on day one, there is a new language to learn. Legacy technology is a problem. Integration is normally a problem. Extracting data is a problem. Clean data is another problem. And I know Steve has a few things to say about that, right? Bad data is a problem. Non-standardization is an issue, right? And it's not just Swift ISO. ISO is not just one standard, right? I mean, it is one standard, but when you think about complying, it's not just with the Swift CBPR Plus format, which is a big one to cover anyhow, but the Fed has got their own version coming out. I mean, there are multiple payment schemes, there are multiple MIs that have got their own version of ISO that needs complying with. And like Steve was saying earlier, when you go from SEPA to Target 2, it changes, right? So there's a lot of rethinking as a bank to do when you think about ISO. And then open banking is a whole different ballgame, because then you've got data to be exposed and on a day-to-day basis. So your performance thresholds are very, very different, right? The uptime requirements for APIs to your competitors are extremely high. And it's not just API availability, there are also very, very stringent thresholds on API responsiveness, right? So there's a bunch of things to think about. A lot of them quite often can point back to legacy technology. And that's where, again, you know, IBM and Fiorano will help massively. But there's quite a bit to do.
Saren, anything to add at this point?
No, I think Bijou covered it. I mean, the way I look at it is, you know, I mean, there are banks that have payment systems that go back, you know, 3 decades, you know, 30 years, and in trying to integrate that is a challenge.
You're not pointing any fingers, Saren.
And you know, the way I look at it, it's like a ripping up your electrical, you know, the wiring system at home and then reinstalling a new one. So it takes a lot of work. You need experienced players in here, a lot of planning, and you got to get it right. And the people who have done this day in and day out, they need to be, working with you guys to help you transition. So it's a lot of planning associated with this work.
And Steve, anything? Or
So just a couple of things. So the first, yeah, the 30-year-old systems, I can speak from experience, and there's good reasons. We keep them in place because they don't break. They're
Right.
they're fit to purpose, but they won't be when this new technology comes out. And that's one of the key things. We've got to look at those strategically and say we need to come up with a plan to get something up to speed. The point that Bijou had made about this integration with the other applications, there's two aspects to it. The one is that the systems just don't have the data in the right places the way that we need it today. It's not there. And I think we need to think strategically about how we're going to get it in there. So he had talked about that data entry thing. And I think that's going to be a challenge too. It brings to mind a story that I had heard in fact, at another panel at one of the BAFT events, where there was a compliance consultant who was talking about a client that she had where they were asking an account holder at the point when they were opening the account to identify their profession. Tell me what you do, because that's part of our KYC. We have to know what they do for a living. And this particular client had a vast preponderance, a huge majority of astronauts, and they weren't in Houston. Why do they have so many astronauts? Well, it turns out when you fill out the form, it's a drop down, and the first choice was astronaut. So everybody was just picking astronaut and going on. And I think, and while it's a kind of a funny story, it is something we got to be concerned about from an ISO perspective. When we start filling out the static data for clients, I don't want them to all be coming from Austria, because that's the first drop down when they got to pull out the country. We got to figure out a way to do it intelligently where we're capturing the correct data.
actually, you had me thinking there, Steve. The first thing when you said Austria, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, Andorra is probably the first on the drop down list, but
That's
I couldn't think fast enough. So, kind of moving right along, and in the interest of time here. So I'm going to ask a two-part question. Is open banking as safe as online banking services we've used for years? And then secondly, why would you allow your competitors to access your clients' data? So kind of 2 points, but go round. Steve, I'm going to stick with you there for a second on both of those.
So shoot, Barry, because I forgot the first question already.
Okay, the first question is open banking as safe as online banking services we've used for years?
So this is a Sarin thing, and I know Sarin's going to say absolutely. It could be made as safe. From my perspective as a consumer, I think I am more comfortable going to my bank's portal than I would be using the app that I have on my phone to move money. For reporting, yeah, I might be okay with both of them, but to move money, I'm going to have to cross a threshold. I trust my bank. I know my bank. I know from a regulatory standpoint, if they mess it up, the regulator's going to slap them around. From a fintech perspective, I need to build that assurance that we're going to have that safety net. And now the second point that you had made, which was
the competitors' data. Why would you
oh
share?
yeah, because I don't have a choice right now. That's not an option for me. I've got my client coming to me saying, I need you to do this, or I'm not going to be banking with you any longer. And I've got that pressure. Now, from an altruistic standpoint, as a bank, we want to provide what the client has. This is going to provide us not only with a platform to retain the clients we have, but be able to build our clients and get more clients that maybe another provider cannot service this way.
And Sarin, I'm going to kind of throw a curveball at you a little bit here, if I may. How do products like Linux One and the HyperCloud help provide the right infrastructure and the key qualities needed to support the open banking?
Sure, Barry. I mean, what we're seeing is working with these banks around the world, my team and other teams across IBM, is they're preferring to go and leading with hybrid cloud model, right? For various reasons. You're seeing, for security reasons, and we kind of talked about that quite extensively here, but also data residency reasons. So hybrid cloud model has been the preferred model for modernizing their core systems. When we talk about core systems, we're talking about could be core banking, could be core payments, or even core insurance, and as well as cloud native applications. So the net of it is you have to have the right infrastructure. And what we had done is earlier this year, as most of you know, IBM had acquired Red Hat. Working with Red Hat, we had delivered OpenShift container platform for IBM Z and Linux One. So what this does is this brings together industry's most comprehensive enterprise container and Kubernetes platform for payments modernization. And what we have also done here is working with Fiorano, not only getting their app optimized on the platform functionally, but we wanted to make sure for payments, things like scalability is very important, right? You need to be able to handle those spikes. You need to have the right response time. You need to be highly available. Banks are 24/7. And so all of those things, and we had worked with them, and then and most importantly, in addition to functionality, qualities of services, what is the TCO, the total cost of ownership? Is it competitive? So we put a lot of effort there. If you could move to chart 2, Barry. I also want to stress the security part of it. This is we really highlighted security because, again, we're sharing customer data across third-party providers and other banks and so on. So and we, as a customer, you put a trust in your bank, and then you're expecting your bank to do the same, right? And therefore, you need to protect that data. So IBM Cloud has put together a suite of services collectively known as IBM Cloud Hyper Protect services, and they're listed here. There are 4 of them. In a nutshell, what they do is they're there to protect banks' data, and this includes customer data. This includes applications, and not only protecting it at rest, but this is protecting the data in flight and network. So you have 100% protection, and a very important part of this overall supporting the open banking initiative and ISO 20022 transformation.
Great, thank you.
Can I add to that, Barry? One point to add, right? So I think what Saran said is really important, right? So we are super excited about the partnership with IBM. So everything Saran said is spot on, is absolutely critical from a security standpoint. But to go back to your earlier question, open banking by itself provides a lot of security in terms of the way we lay out SCA, the way we manage MATLS, OAuth 2, OIDC, EIDAS certificates. There's a bunch of things that by themselves make open banking absolutely, actually more secure than your internet banking right now. On top of which, Fiorano on IBM provide a whole more set of additional set of security. I think it's a really, really good combination partnership. Absolutely, yes.
All right, we're running a little bit short of time, so kind of a lightning round, if I can, okay? And a question that came from our audience. In the UK, the RTGS integration of messaging standard ISO 20022 is on a 5-year roadmap to full implementation. Under a new national payments architecture, starting with the CHAP system, why is it taking so long? All right, lightning round, gentlemen.
It's a really good question. It's a question I've wondered myself for a long time. But as an example, Steve said ISO should have been live in 2010 as per original plans. So a lot of these things have been moving forward. I mean, we know what the NPA are doing in the UK. I agree, it should be quicker. But beyond that, I don't think I should be quoting on behalf of the Bank of England right now.
Saran, any thoughts?
Not really. I mean, yeah, I'll go with what Biju said there.
Steve, as the banker, and I realize you're not in the UK, but going with your depth and breadth of experience, Why do you see this taking so long?
It's a big rock to move. Even in an environment like England, where there are not that many banking participants, it is still there's a significant financial investment, and because it's changing the way that the information travels, there's an underlying business process that needs to be thought through before a change is made. Moving slower is probably not a bad thing in this case, I would say.
Gentlemen,
Also, the
thank
governments are involved here.
There you go. Just in closing, I'd like to thank all of the folks who joined us today, and really thank you, gentlemen, Bijou, Steve, Saren, for really all of your insights and your information. And with that, I wish everyone a good day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars. Thanks again. Continue to be safe. Thank you all.
Thanks, Barry.
Bye-bye.